Hello, focus learners, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating sociological and technological audit from our source materials. We're going to explore what seems, honestly, like an impossible connection at first glance. I mean, what exactly do modern artificial intelligence and cloud computing have to do with an 18th century midnight ride on horseback? Well, we're going to figure out how the historical grounding of Paul Revere's famous ride might actually hold a legitimate blueprint for understanding and escaping what our sources call the modern digital enclosure. Here is our cognitive map for today's explainer. We'll start with Part 1, the Royalist Cloud Enclosure. Then, Part 2 covers the 1689 breach. In Part 3, we'll look at the midnight ride fixation. Part 4 contrasts the record versus the substrate. And finally, Part 5, restoring agentic sovereignty. Okay, let's dive right into Section 1, the Royalist Cloud Enclosure. So, the source material neutrally frames the current AI landscape not just as a technological leap, but as a massive infrastructural power grab. They argue that these gigantic cloud inference systems are essentially rebranding computer science itself. Instead of computing being a decentralized tool you run locally, it's being transformed into a centralized, metered utility. The source refers to this as the restoration of agentic kingship. It's a system that recreates these pre-constitutional authority structures by enclosing computational power. It basically limits your individual freedom through what they call interface inversion, essentially flipping control away from you, the user, straight back to a central authority. Moving right along to Section 2, the 1689 breach. The sources trace the evolution of sovereignty along a really distinct chronological path. It starts way back with the 1648 Treaty of Westphalia, which formalized state sovereignty. Then it moves to the 1689 Orange Pledge, representing major constitutional shifts in power. From there, it jumps to the 1775 Midnight Ride as a physical assertion of local intent, and lands right in our laps today with the 21st century great enclosure of digital computing. The research links the historical struggle for physical and political sovereignty directly to our modern crisis of computational governance. It's like a giant historical puzzle coming together. Which naturally leads us to a pretty pivotal question. If we are currently living through this period of digital enclosure, where our computational power is locked tight behind centralized AI application programming interfaces, how do we break out? How do we actually restore individual, decentralized computing power? The source instantly answers that question by leaping straight into the 18th century with this exact quote. "I set off upon a very good horse." This is straight from Paul Revere's third account of the events of April 18, 1775. The source explicitly refers to this document not just as some dusty history, but as a bit-perfect legislative record of the original strike. It is the definitive, undeniable proof of action. And that brings us to Section 3, the Midnight Ride Fixation. You know, in modern Web3 and blockchain architecture, developers talk a lot about the data availability layer. This is a digital system designed to ensure that the intent and the historical record of an action are permanently verifiable and witnessable by anyone. Well, our source material creatively reveals that Paul Revere's third account, detailing his exact mission to Lexington at 10 p.m. to warn John Hancock and Samuel Adams, served this exact same function in 1775. Revere literally wrote the 18th century data availability layer, making the metabolic intent of his ride absolutely undeniable to the public. Now let's unpack Section 4, the record versus the substrate. Picture a museum exhibit. Revere's account is printed on a cream-colored text panel, mounted right against a rough red brick wall. The researchers use this visual to deeply contrast the two sides of an absolutely crucial dialectic. The cream-colored panel represents the record, or the protocol, the invisible, bit-perfect legislative intent. The red brick wall, on the other hand, represents the substrate or the forensic floor. That's the rigid physical execution space. It is perfectly analogous to the hardware or silicon microchips running our code today. You absolutely need both for the system to work. The real takeaway here is a concept called non-severability, which the source ties to the philosophical idea of haecity, essentially the specific uniqueness of a thing in a specific moment. The mission simply cannot be separated from the record. Revere's exact words, the precise time of 10 p.m., the specific horse, they represent a unique, irreversible realization of intent. Revere's words act as the governing protocol, and the horse acts as the physical hardware executing that protocol. You can't just have the abstract idea of the ride, right? You need the exact recorded words executing on the physical substrate. Let's bring it all home with Section 5, restoring agentic sovereignty. So, how do we use this historical knowledge to break the royalist cloud enclosure today? The source proposes agentic sovereignty. This means restoring the pilot's local, decentralized execution power using an inalienable record, just like Revere did. The authors argue for a fundamental shift away from centralized artificial intelligence and toward what they call artificial life, or AL. In their framework, AL acts as the true chassis of agentic sovereignty. It allows individuals to run verifiable, bit-perfect protocols on their own local hardware substrates rather than just renting access from a centralized king. The researchers summarize some incredibly concrete steps developers can take right now to implement this symmetric resolution. First, actively reject the great enclosure of centralized cloud models. Second, adopt the mindset of the sovereign pilot, realizing your own intent locally. Third, execute what the source calls the proximity law of compute, keeping your processing power close to the edge, close to you, the user. And finally, anchor your digital truths not to probabilistic AI guesses, but to absolute mathematical invariance. They specifically note sequences A297189 and A32864 from the online Encyclopedia of Integer Sequences. This is exactly how you build a reliable, undeniable forensic floor. It's honestly an incredible framework that bridges centuries of human thought. We've seen how the cream-color text panel of protocol completely relies on the red brick wall of physical execution, and how the great enclosure of AI directly mirrors the historical battles for individual agency. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought based on our explainer today. If Paul Revere's bit-perfect written account on that horse could launch an entire revolution and permanently secure local intent, what exact words will you choose to write into your own digital substrate today to restore your own digital sovereignty? Thank you so much for joining me, focused learners, and as always, keep exploring the structures that govern our world.